Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining the Rock and Metal Guardian today. Hope you're doing well wherever you may find yourselves. I'm Dane, your host. Is Foreigner the epitome of rock and roll music? Ritchie Blackmore would have you believe so, or so it seems. I've been stewing over this topic for a while now, in fact a very long time, years in fact. I will answer this question at the end or near the end of the video, and of course, it's just my opinion. Many or most Deep Purple, Rainbow, and Ritchie Blackmore fans know at some point in his career, around the time that Dio joined Black Sabbath, Blackmore began to have these cravings or leanings and started to chase a more commercial sound in his music. And it was reported that he was influenced by the band Foreigner. Influenced, I would not say inspired. Perhaps a better word would be jealous due to Foreigner's commercial success. If we look at 4 albums from Rainbow, Down to Earth, Difficult to Cure, Straight Between the Eyes, and Bent Out of Shape, we can clearly hear these new leanings, these cravings, interests, whatever you want to call them. He's clearly chasing that commercial sound. Now, having said that, I would argue that Down to Earth and Bent Out of Shape, especially Bent Out of Shape, are the two ones that have that most commercial Foreigner sound, and I'm putting Foreigner in quotation marks, that commercial sound, right? That more pop-oriented rock, melodic rock, if you will. And there's some of that on the 2 albums in between, but on those 2 albums in between, there's still some of that cool hard rock stuff. Again, I argue that Bent Out of Shape of those 4 is the most commercial, though so much can be found on all 4. Now let's look at some of the songs as examples. From Down to Earth, All Night Long, and Since You've Been Gone, that last one, a Russ Ballard penned song. Then from Difficult to Cure, I Surrender, Spotlight Kid, and Can't Happen Here. From Straight Between the Eyes, Stone Cold, which I love, and Tearing Out My Heart. And then just one example from Bent Out of Shape is Street of Dreams. So Blackmore's pursuit of a more commercial sound as an artist got my wheels turning, even more so lately. As I said, I've been thinking about this for a very long time, and even more recently, although it's been a while also, there's this great YouTube video. I don't remember who posted it, but it's of David Bowie. It's just a clip from one of his many interviews. He's got short orange hair. It's probably middle of his career, and he says, "Never play to the gallery." And that's what the title of the YouTube video is, I do believe. So that made me connect to the Ritchie Blackmore conundrum, him chasing a more commercial sound. And again, this Bowie clip is very brief. I will connect the dots in a minute, so give me a minute or two to explain and set this up. So Bowie says in this video, never play to the gallery, never work for other people. In other words, he adds, don't fulfill other people's expectations. There are 2 ways to respond to this if we connect it to Blackmore's desire to go in a more commercial avenue. However, the difficulty resides in his motivation for doing so. We can only guess, surmise, guess, as I said, why he's doing this. What is his motivation, right? I think it has to be one of 2 possibilities. Here's the first. He's pursuing a more commercial artistry because he believes a more popular or pop-oriented rock sound is the highest form of rock and roll. Is it the epitome? Is it for him the pinnacle? Is it high art? Again, is it high art? Is pop rock or melodic rock high art, according to Ritchie Blackmore? And what he did in the past, neoclassical hard rock with some occasional blues scales and others thrown in for good measure, low art? If he truly believes this, then he was not, as Bowie said, quote-unquote, playing to the gallery, because he's going with what he believes is the right course of action, his new expectations, musically for him personally. Now here's the other possibility, number 2. This option is that Blackmore, is indeed playing to the gallery, quote unquote, which is again working to fulfill other people's expectations. In this case, the fans and record company executives, radio stations, the Billboard charts, etc. chasing RIAA certification, right? That kind of thing. Because he wants commercial success, which more often than not is giving in to what the masses want, and this is therefore a sacrifice of integrity, artistic integrity, or credibility, or both, because money is the motivation for commercial success, not the music itself. And tied to money, of course, would be the fame and the popularity that goes with that, right? So money and popularity, even more popularity, that equates to success for so many people, right? Now, I will circle back to these two possibilities and share with you which of the two I think it is, which of the two I believe is the case. But we need to pursue Bowie's train of thought even further. Bowie goes on to say that you do your worst work if you give in to other people's expectations. He then adds by saying that if you feel safe, and by safe he means content or complacent. He doesn't use those two words, but that's what he means. So if you feel safe in the area that you're working in, then you're not working in the right area. Always go further into the water than you feel you're capable of being in. Word for word from Bowie. He adds, you know you are in the right spot when your feet just can't quite touch bottom. Now, is not a change in direction to a more commercial mainstream sound and therefore a more commercial and mainstream audience a place of safety? I would argue for the most part, yes. Blackmore's former musical stylings in early Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio and most of his time in Deep Purple wasn't safe, meaning not everyone is going to find the music here appealing compared to mainstream audiences. Now, here I need to go into two definitions of what I mean mainstream. So, number one, mainstream as in mainstream culture. So, for example, if let's say you're a new band and then you get really popular and you become quite successful, but you stick to your roots that are not mainstream, for example, then you're part of the mainstream culture, but your music is not mainstream. So when I say mainstream culture, again, you've gained an audience, you've become successful, you're selling a lot of records, that sort of thing, you're touring, a lot of money being made, so you're getting very popular, and you are popular. So you're part of the mainstream culture, but your music is not mainstream. Think Metallica, right? Their first 4 albums, give or take, okay? And then we have commercially mainstream, where you've changed your music, and now it's more pop, rock-oriented, and now it's very commercial. Okay, so those are the two distinctions. Again, mainstream culture, you're sticking to your musical guns, versus commercially mainstream. You've moved away from your roots, and now you're going with the flow, okay? Now, I'm of the opinion that is the second of the two possibilities that I mentioned that explains Blackmore's pursuit of commercial success. Keep in mind, I cannot prove it. It is just my belief or theory. I believe that the first 3 Rainbow albums in Deep Purple, from In Rock through and including Perfect Strangers, are Blackmore and the band existing in waters where, to quote Bowie, your feet don't quite touch bottom. In essence, what I'm saying is that Blackmore gave into, or he caved into chasing the pursuit of mass acceptance. So he caved, he gave into the thrill or the craving of money and or the success or illusion of success that, or power or fame that goes with commercial popularity. This pursuit of mass acceptance. Of giving into supply and demand, or should I say giving into demand and supply, since the masses, it seems, demand commercial music more than anything else, for the most part, demand, and therefore let's supply it. Okay, the audience demands this, so Ritchie supplied it. Of wanting to be liked instead of making it about the music, again, therefore integrity. Acceptance and validity, my opinion, should mostly come from within. Mostly come from within. Validity and acceptance. After all, it was Shakespeare who wrote, "To thine own self be true," in Hamlet. But I think Blackmore pulled a Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. In that movie, his girlfriend asks Patrick, "Why do you have a job? You don't need the money." And he says, "I want to fit in." And that's what I think Blackmore was doing. He wanted to fit in. Again, can't prove it. I believe that the 4 Rainbow albums I mentioned to be Blackmore's least inspired works. We're going back to Bowie's quote that when you fulfill other people's expectations, that's when you do your worst. And Bowie's probably speaking from the heart here, because he's probably talking, I don't know when that video was made, that interview, but he's probably talking about the trilogy of Let's Dance, although I'm quite fond of that. Let's Dance, Never Let Me Down, and Tonight. Or he could be talking about the three that I don't like, Never Let Me Down, Tonight, and Black Tie, White Noise. And three of the four of those he calls his Phil Collins period. Anyway, so I think these four Rainbow albums that I mentioned are Blackmore's least inspired work. Don't get me started on the fifth one that follows that, where Blackmore's on the cover, looks like a scarecrow, and it's returned to the original name of the band, which is Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. It's got Doogie, can't remember his last name, on vocals. Don't even get me started on that one. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some great songs on these four albums, with the exception of Bent Out of Shape, which I don't care for much at all. Especially Straight Between the Eyes, I think, is, of those four, that's the best of those, of that commercially pop area. Death Alley Driver, Stone Cold, Tearing Out My Heart, some great stuff there. It's different, but I didn't want Rainbow to stick into this new, I thought they would return to a more heavy sound. Of course they didn't. Bent Out of Shape is even worse, in my opinion. So I don't like most of Down to Earth. I never listened to it much. I can't remember the last time I have. And I haven't listened to Bent Out of Shape in quite some time. And Bent Out of Shape, we're on the subject, sounds like a misshapen child of melodic rock meets powerful solos that would work better in heavier material overall. Foreigner? Foreigner? Really, Ritchie? Boggles the mind. No disrespect to Foreigner, but they were always, for the most part, commercial and mainstream, and yet they get uber mainstream once they put out the album Agent Provocateur, and you get the Jump the Shark song, I Want to Know What Love Is. There's actually a video on YouTube called The Song That Killed Foreigner. Check it out if you get a chance, and it's talking about, of course, I Want to Know What Love Is. This is a release for Foreigner that proved to be, for many bands, well, what I'm trying to say is, I want to know what love is for Foreigner, their Jump the Shark moment. And of course, we have other bands that have songs that prove to be their Jump the Shark moments. And so let's talk about that a little bit. So Styx is Mr. Roboto / Don't Let It End. REO Speedwagon's I Can't Fight This Feeling. And Soundgarden's Spoon Man. There are so many others. I could do a video on, songs that ruined a band's career, at least for me personally, that sort of thing. And of course, some people would understand it, and some people would get all bent out of shape and worked up. Again, it's just an opinion. So yeah, I Want to Know What Love is for many of us where Foreigner jumped the shark. So it begs the question, why do so many of our beloved bands descend into pop mediocrity? You've heard the expression, popularity is the hallmark of mediocrity. That is to say, average. Keep in mind, I'm not saying all pop is mediocre. There's a lot of pop. Well, I'm sorry, let me take that back. There's a little pop that I like out there, like the Beatles, some Rolling Stone stuff. I'm not a big pop music person. Most of it, I just don't. I'm not a Swiftie. I don't listen to Adele. She's got a voice, but it doesn't still, ironically or paradoxically, doesn't appeal to me. I don't like much of Lady Gaga. I don't like Aerosmith after, but I'll talk more about them later. After Rockin' a Hard Place got way too mainstream and commercial, so you'll see the connection in a minute. So as I said, why do so many bands descend into pop mediocrity? And that's part of the real question and part of the video here that I want to speak to you about. So again, I don't think all pop is mediocre, but I think too much of it is. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all pop music is mediocre. Too much is, though, I feel, unfortunately. Now, we can take this a step further if we believe former Jethro Tull guitarist Martin Barr, who said in a recent interview a month or two ago, 3 months ago, that he said that 90% of all music sucks. For me, the jury is still out on that. I really have to think about that. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure I believe that. I would say maybe 70% of all music sucks, 60%, maybe I go as high as 80%. But I really have to, and there's no way for me to chart that. But if I had to guess, I would, yeah, it's 99%. I don't know about that. Anyway, so my next point, it is really frustrating when our beloved bands do this. They descend into pop mediocrity. Or they sell out, right? Think back to the time when a band was lesser well known, like, say, Metallica, early on in their career. And they were according to you and me. So according to you and me, we've all been through this, right? According to you and to me, they're my band, right? Because they're no one else is liking them in your circle, right? That kind of thing. No one else gets them, right? And then later on, your friends, they later, jump on board and that sort of thing. In high school, when Metallica was new, my friends made fun of me. And then years later, I run into a couple of them after high school, and they're like, oh, I'm loving this Metallica now. I'm like, okay, cool. So the concept of you and me, going, it's my band because, no one else seems to be liking them in your circle of friends and that sort of thing. Because they're unique, there's something unique, like that first Metallica album, right? So unique in so many ways, but not for long, right? And even after they became popular and well-known, and so part of a mainstream culture, but not mainstream musically, they stick to their roots, okay? Or what make them unique, right? Sticking to what makes them unique for a while. Now, as we know, Metallica does not stay and stick to their guns, but you get my point. It's so frustrating, right? When we're invested in a band that we're loving, we love the sound that they have, and then they move away from it. And that's my point. So they go from being unique and sticking to their guns, sticking to their roots, eventually become commercially successful, but not commercial sounding, right? So again, part of mainstream culture, but not commercially sounding. But of course, as I said, Metallica becomes commercially sounding. All right. So we many of us find this so frustrating. All right. So here's a list of bands and artists who have gone the Ritchie Blackmore route, as I call it, although Blackmore is not the first person to do this, to go in a more commercial direction, or what may be called selling out. Def Leppard, Night Ranger, and I have to specify something about Night Ranger. The reason they went more commercial, I still blame them, is because the record company, after the first album, pressured them to stick to a more ballady, commercial type sound. Styx, Van Halen, with the Hagar era, right? Kiss, Aerosmith. Tyler runs the band. It's been brought to light in recent months or whatever, or a year, that for a while back or so, the other members of the band tried to get Steven to, hey, let's go back to our roots and do more blues, not counting Honking on Bobo. And Tyler said nope. And the reason for that, of course, is money and the fame that goes with that illusion of success. Right? And of course, to the detriment of so many fans. Bon Jovi. While the first two albums are very commercial, what follows, starting with Slippery When Wet, is even more commercial. I never forget. I'm in high school. My friend comes over because we're about to go to baseball practice or what have you, and I'm watching MTV, and Belinda Carlisle's video comes on for Heaven on Earth, and my friend goes, "That sounds like a Bon Jovi song." He's not wrong. He's not wrong. It's that pop, lighthearted, clap your hands to that. So many of us like that, not me, but so many of us don't like that. So again, a matter of opinion. So Bon Jovi's one of these bands that's pop music disguised as something heavier. All right. And of course, Aerosmith and Bon Jovi, I blame Desmond Child for that. And speaking of Desmond Child, the Alice Cooper album, Trash, is Desmond Child influenced. Peter Gabriel, Sledgehammer. I love Peter Gabriel's first four solo albums, but after that, Ozzy Osbourne. I like his first three albums, and I like parts of can't remember the album where he's a dragon. It's got Shot in the Dark on it, the fourth album, right? And then there's some other songs I like along the way, but overall, he gets way too commercial. And it's what I'm trying to say is it's not only is it frustrating, but it's such a shame that this is the direction that he goes in. ZZ Top, starting with Eliminator, of course they come back, and so some of these that I'm going to mention, this descent into pop commercial mainstreamness, if you will, doesn't last very long, thank goodness. Peter Frampton leaves Humble Pie because he wanted to go solo, and we have so many solo artists who they go solo and then their music gets extremely pop oriented. Peter Frampton, another one like this, great. Rod Stewart, like the last whatever. I haven't followed him since Out of Order because, well, Leave Virginia Alone. That's that whenever that album came out, and then he becomes this crooner, right? So, Money. Great White's first two albums is more hard rocking, heavy hitting, and then you get Twice Shy and Once Bitten, and then Twice Shy. Those two albums back to back are more hair metally, but that more, it's really again pop music disguised as something heavier. Although some of that I do like. Journey, starting off the first three albums, right, more of a hard rock, jazz, fusion-y, Santana still influenced type of band, and I like some of the stuff with Steve Perry, very much so. But again, just another example. Blue Oyster Cult with Revolution by Night and Club Ninja. Guns N' Roses, before their first album, they were more of a glam band with the album, or rather it was an EP, Live Like a Delete Yourself, can't say the other word. And then they put out the debut, and that's, hard rocking in spots, right? But then after that, they get way too commercial. Santana comes to mind, into the middle of their discography. Motley Crue, you got two great albums with the debut and the sophomore effort, Shout Out the Devil, and then after that, you get dung 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 dung. You get this piano stuff, right? How do you go from ga 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 ga? You're at Livewire, right? Sorry, I can't do that very well. And then you get this piano stuff. It's just so frustrating. And they never come back to that heavy stuff, right? Heart, those first 4 or 5 albums up to and including Baby Lestrange, and then after that, all falls apart, at least for me. Queen, Fleetwood Mac, you have the Danny Kerwin, Jeremy Spencer, Peter Green era, and then after that, look, some of that pop stuff's great. Rumors and the Fleetwood Mac album before that, just called Fleetwood Mac, that's some good pop music. So that's another example. But after Rumors, I don't like much of what I'm hearing. Michael Bolton started off kind of more of a hard rock, and then he gets to a second album. Now he's doing this crooning stuff. Money. To some degree, Whitesnake. Judas Priest with Turbo and Johnny B. Good and some other songs on Ram It Down. And I've already spoken about Metallica. So if a band wants to be more commercial with a hit song, then why not do the following? Do an occasional ballad. If we go back to, say, Kiss's fourth album, Destroyer, and then Rock and Roll Over, you have on Destroyer, you have Beth, and then on Rock and Roll Over, you have Hard Luck Woman and maybe another ballad or two. So the formula, even though I don't like formulas, but the formula used to be, if you were a hard rock outfit, you would have mostly hard rock or rockin' songs on your album, and then you would have a ballad or two, if you will, like Beth again. And then at some point, bands started doing more and more of the pop-oriented ballady stuff, like Bon Jovi. It comes to mind, all the Aerosmith stuff, starting with Permanent Vacation. Why? Again, that pursuit of fame and money and commercial success. But can't you still have your cake and eat it too if you do the Kiss route and have 1 or 2 songs, and those are your radio songs, and then everything else is your deep cuts to heavy stuff you're fulfilling your own expectations while also fulfilling your fans, right? That kind of thing. So hair metal bands go overboard, I think, with this ballady stuff. Again, as I said, so many heavy metal bands are pop bands disguised as a heavier act. How hard is it to make an album? that pleases every member of the band. And so what I mean by that is, and I forget which album it is. It's probably, if I remember correctly, Somewhere in Time, the Iron Maiden album, where Bruce Dickinson is working on a song on acoustic guitar, and Steve Harris is like, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I thought our next album could be like Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti and have some acoustic stuff." And Steve Harris was like, "No," and he shot all of that down. And there's some videos out there that talks about how Bruce Dickinson didn't have one entire written song on certain albums, and I think that's the album Somewhere in Time. It may be one or two or more. So another example would be Ken Hensley and Uriah Heep, where he would put his foot down and say, "Nope, just my songs are making this album." When you do that, you're limiting your fan base to what they're going to want to hear or what they like. So Doobie Brothers come to mind, another example, right? I love Michael McDonald's stuff, but why couldn't you have his style of song, taking it to the streets, but also have that hard rockin' stuff as well? Why couldn't the Doobie Brothers made albums where you had the traditional lovable Michael McDonald sound, where he's singing, "You don't know me, but I'm your bro," right? And then taking it and then you have, the hard rockin' stuff that he did earlier on in the career. Why can't you have an album with both? That's what greatest hits albums have, so why can't you do that as a studio album? Anyway, it boggles the mind, as I said. So going back to Bruce Dickinson for a minute, why can't a band do a Physical Graffiti type album and have some songs that are hard rockin' and heavy, and then others that are more melodic or ballady or acoustic? I don't understand that. Or why can't you, as a band, put out an album that's, say, all the more slower ballady stuff, the Michael McDonald stuff, if you will, or the Hard Luck Woman or Beth style pennings of Kiss, and then put out another album 3 or 4 months later or 6 months later? Because so many bands did that in the 70s. They would put 2 albums out in a 6-month period or within a year, and then put that heavy hard rockin' one out. So you have lots of options here. I just don't get it. Why not please everyone in the band? So anyway, so as you can tell, I chose the second position as to why Ritchie Blackmore chose to go in a more commercial route, because he did not think, I do not think that he was fulfilling his own expectations. I think he was chasing fame and commercial success, and therefore the record companies, the executives, right, the label, the fans, those who crave, pop music or commercially sounding or more commercially sounding music instead of the hard and heavy and hard rocking stuff. So it begs the question, we have bands that do stick to their guns and have throughout their career, such as AC/DC, Motorhead, Iron Maiden for the most part, and then Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath with some occasional missteps. Judas Priest with Turbo, right? Bowie with those 3 albums. But staying commercial for good, therein lies the problem for many fans. So let's talk about 2 more, and that's Genesis and Rush. So Peter Gabriel leaves, and then Phil Collins steps in, and he does a wonderful job taking over Peter Gabriel's role, steps in his shoes quite nicely. And even whether you believe this or not isn't the point, but in one interview, Peter Gabriel says something about how Phil Collins does a better job at sounding like him, or something to that effect. I like both, but I tend to like Peter's voice more, but I do love Phil's as well. And then, of course, the guitar player leaves, Steve Hackett, and then, of course, the album, and then there were 3, and this is where they begin to go. You get Duke in this, forget which order that's in. Trick of the Tail is wonderful, right? The first album with just Phil and not Peter. And then you get Abacab, which is okay, but then you really start to get the commercial stuff with the self-titled Genesis and the stuff that comes after that. Songs like, and I forget the album, Taking It All Too Hard, and Tonight, 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 which sounds like a beer commercial, and I think it ended up being on one. Just this commercial stuff that's just not the Genesis many of us know and love, right? Again, this sounds like Phil Collins solo stuff, and he's like Peter Frampton and some others I mentioned where they go solo and they sound nothing like they did in Genesis, up to a point, of course. And if we talk about Rush, those first 10 albums, right? The debut through and including Moving Pictures, and then the two that follow that, Signals and Grace Under Pressure, I like, but I don't love them. And then after that is when, for me, the wheels come off for a while, with Power Windows, Hold Your Fire, and then there's a succession of mediocre albums. So, I don't get this pursuit of commercialism. I hate it. It's so frustrating. So some will argue that going more commercial is a natural progression, and I'm going to disagree ad nauseum, because it's not. It's a conscious decision of band members to do this. Now, I am not arguing against experimentation, but if you become so far removed from who you were, for me, that's a problem, and for so many of us, that's a problem. Here's a great example of a band who has stuck to their roots the same way, in the same vein as AC/DC, Motorhead, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath. And of course, you don't want every album to sound the same. And unfortunately for AC/DC, you kind of get that once you get into For Those About to Rock and everything else that follows, with an exception or two. Thunderstruck is kind of a unique song compared to rest in their catalog because of that opening riff, right? That's just amazing. So on one hand, you don't want to be formulaic and have the same album over and over again, but you can, I believe, because I see examples of it, you can stick to your guns and not produce the same album over and over again. It's difficult, but it can be done. So I've seen, again, Motorhead comes to mind, right? And Black Sabbath, again, they've had some missteps, but the wheels do come back on in many cases, I think. They were never again after Dio left the band, but anyway. So the album that I have in mind, to give an example of a band who has stuck to its roots since the beginning, but hasn't put out the same old album every time, and also has experimented, and it works, and they haven't veered too away from, they haven't become pop-oriented or commercial, and that is Cirith Ungol. Their new album I did a review on recently, and so it's the Cirith Ungol we know and love, but it's not formulaic, and it's experimental as well, because they've got a lot more acoustic than you normally would expect from them, and so it works. So thank you so much for watching. So no, I don't think, as I said, Foreigner is the epitome of rock and roll music. I think there's so much better. And no offense to Foreigner fans or the band Foreigner. I like them, but they're not a band I listen to quite often anymore. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Take care now. Bye.